Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, salam alaikum, shalom, jambo. Bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jadley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so honored, really honored that you're part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family. Please be sure to subscribe to the show. You can subscribe to us on Roku, on the iHeart Family channel, on the iHeart Radio app, on Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is John Beede, the author of The Warrior Challenge. We're really excited to have John here on the show. I'm telling you, this podcast has given me the opportunity to speak to some of my heroes. I've had a chance to speak to astronauts, nuclear physicists, some of my favorite authors, and today I get a chance to somebody who's actually scaled Mount Everest. Incredible. But before we speak to John, I just want to speak to the authors that are listening to the show. You know, we're talking about John has scaled Mount Everest in every, the tallest mountain on every continent around the world. An incredible feat. Sometimes, I think, for a lot of authors, marketing your book and letting the world know about your book can seem as challenging as climbing Mount Everest. I mean, it really is difficult, especially nowadays with pandemic and restrictions and not being able to do school visits and library visits. We have something that may help you. It's called the Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read Program. If our panel of teachers, parents, and kids believe that your book is worthy of 4 or 5 out of 5 stars, it becomes a Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read. And with that status comes a number of really, really super promotional tools that can really help your book stand out from the crowd of books that are published every single month. And we're talking thousands, literally thousands of children's books published every single month. Check it out today. You can go right to our website, readingwithyourkids.com, click on the authors click here button, scroll down to where it says Certified Great Reads. Joining us right now from the Las Vegas area in Nevada. I'm really, really excited and really honored. Our guest today, he's been everywhere. He's been on ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, and the New York Times. Boy, he's really come down in the world. I don't know what's happened. Please welcome to the show the author of The Warrior Challenge, John Beede. John, how are you?
Jed, I'm awesome. Thank you so much for having me today. Really
excited to have you here. There's so much going on, so much we could talk about, but I guess the best place to start is to talk about the Warrior Challenge and let folks know what that's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I climbed Mount Everest. I climbed the tallest mountain on every continent, and I didn't realize what I was doing at the time, but I was going through a rite of passage. And when I finished, everybody said, "Are you going to write a book about the experience? Are you going to talk about what happened?" And I thought, well, that'd be just selfish for me to do, and maybe I will one day, but I thought more important would be to create a quicker, easier, faster rite of passage that teaches young boys, young men how to get the same values, lessons, principles for both kindness and drive and toughness to grow up as a man in today's culture. So that's what this book is.
I get the toughness and the strength that you get from climbing all these mountains, but where does kindness come in?
Yeah, that's why the subtitle is, 8 Quests to Grow Up with Kindness, Courage, and Grit. That is so critical and so important because there's no sense in being tough for the sake of being tough. That usually will end up just being like a jerk. And you see guys, you hear all this thing about like man boys in today's culture, right? And usually on one end of the spectrum, that's a guy who's overcompensating and being like, "Oh, I'm gonna beat everybody," like he's doing too much like aggro male stuff. On the other end of the spectrum, you get like spineless weaklings. True strength and true, I believe, manhood, and what we should strive to teach our young men today is to find that balance of being tough in finding kindness for others, strong in knowing what the right values are to bring to any given situation in life, dedicated, determined, driven to be self-aware and to improve the world around them. I've learned this in the mountains from things going wrong. Like, what do you do when you're your only hope for your team, or they're your only hope for you, and you guys need to get yourself out together? It's through teamwork. It's through looking after one another. It's through lifting each other up and making one another stronger that your team succeeds and gets off the mountain alive.
Wow, I love that, and I climbed the highest mountain in Maine, Mount Katahdin, and that was amazing. And when I finished it, people said, "Well, what mountain are you going to do next?" And I said, "I did that. I'm done." It's just not my thing. But boy, you're talking about something completely different. Climbing Everest, that's a month-long endeavor. Am I right about that?
2 months.
2 months. Wow, that's amazing. I love what you were talking about helping kids understand that being kind is actually a strength. It takes courage. Yeah. It takes strength to be kind. One of the words that we hear, or one of the phrases we hear a lot these days, is this idea of toxic masculinity. Sure. And I'm not quite sure what that is, but I think what you were talking about earlier on, just guys being jerks, it covers a lot of that.
That's the easiest way to put it, yeah.
Yeah.
So this book was the concept was actually brought to me by Penguin Random House, the publisher. And that was their goal, was to make sure that a Me Too 2.0 movement didn't happen in the future. They wanted all this stuff that you saw in the news about toxic masculinity to stop. Mm-hmm. And they didn't want to go about it by, scaring the heck out of people, because that term scares people. It turns them off, right? So they wanted to showcase strong yet value-based men. And they knew I had met a bunch of them. So it's not just my stories that are in this book. This is I have interviewed the head of the Maasai Association, who trains young boys how to hunt lions. And he's the starting chapter. And then you're Danny Way, and you're jumping over the Great Wall of China on a skateboard. This guy who had a broken ankle, and I'm showing young men how to have self-awareness. And then you're off-road racing in Mexico with Dennis Hollenbeck. And raising money for a battered women's and children's shelter, showing that it's not about other people's finish lines. It's about determining what your own finish line is. Then, of course, you go up Mount Everest with me. You're escaping from a communist country. You're escaping from communist Romania. You've got rock climbing stories in here. You're Ernest Shackleton, sinking through the ice into Antarctica. You're Robert Smalls, escaping from the Confederate South. All of these awesome guys throughout history are embodying these traits of living by their values. And so that's how this book came together, to combat what you just mentioned, toxic masculinity. Yeah. Or I just came from an approach of how do we raise awesome young men in today's world.
Yeah. I like that. How do we raise awesome young men in this world? I guess somebody out there listening might be saying, but what about girls? Can girls get something out of the Warrior Challenge?
That's an awesome question, and that was a huge struggle. Why isn't it just 8 quests for kids to grow up with kindness, courage, and grit? And what I discovered through all the research I did, through talking to parents, through talking with teachers, talking with kids themselves, is that guys get a different set of messages about what it means to grow up well. And there's a ton of resources for girls already out there, specific for girls, that teach these same concepts. But there is nothing, we couldn't find it. We looked everywhere to a book like this that teaches specifically for young men. And that's a huge gap. That's a huge problem, because then you've got these wonderfully self-aware, wonderfully spiritually conscious girls that grow up to be women that are grounded in their faith and values, but guys are being left behind. And so when we saw this gap, it became crystal clear that there needed to be a solution that was for guys to bring them up to speed, really.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm thinking of some that this is a fantastic book. Obviously, it's a fantastic book for young men to read on their own, but I think it would be an especially wonderful book for young men to be reading with their dads, if their dad isn't home, with an uncle, and even with a mom, and it can be the springboard for some really, really powerful and empowering conversations. I'm
so glad you mentioned that, because that's the ideal. When I wrote this, I was more thinking, if parents, if teachers, if youth leaders sit down with young men and read this together, then that gives the adult the chance to be the warrior guide. Instead of, my words coming through in the page, if you become that role model to the young men and you help instill these values that your family or your community wants your young man to grow up with, that is so much more powerful, and it opens up unbelievable opportunities for beautiful conversations and growth moments. And what's so cool with all these examples is, instead of saying like, hey, what do we talk about with kindness, and like coming down on your kid, in those moments, those teaching moments that we all know that young kids need sometimes. Instead of that, there's an opportunity to just say, hey, what would Danny Way do right now? The guy who jumped over the Great Wall of China on a skateboard. And because it's rooted in a story, that's how we all learn throughout thousands of years of human history, is through stories. Because it's rooted in a story, it's like, oh yeah, he's my hero and I want to act more like him. Or what would Ernest Shackleton do right now? I know this homework is tough, but what would Ernest Shackleton do? He saved his 28 men in the freezing ice for 2 years. Would he push through this, or would he give up right now? Oh yeah, I want to be like Ernest Shackleton. And I'm hearing stories every day from parents, just like you said, who have read this with their kids, that are saying things just like that.
Yeah. Hey, boy, we need a lot of Ernest Shackletons right now, as we're approaching the anniversary of the start of the pandemic. We think we have it tough, but just imagining that, being trapped in the ice for over 2 years.
That is one of my favorite stories of history. I mean, broad strokes of it, guy wants to cross he wants to cross the Antarctic continent, be the first person who does. He sails down there. Ship gets trapped in the ice. He spends a winter in his boat with like 61 sled dogs and 28 men in a 141-foot boat. I mean, tight quarters. Talk about quarantine, right?
Wow.
There's no sunshine. It's like 80 degrees below zero, and they're just shivering their butts off in this ship. Well, they think when it warms up, the ice is going to melt. We'll keep sailing. No, the ice melts and the ship gets crushed by two basically sides of this iceberg that smash the boat. It sinks. They take their 3 lifeboats, drag them for almost 1,000 miles across the ice till they get to the edge of this massive floating iceberg. Then they sail and row for a week to get to a deserted island. Nobody else has the energy to continue. By the way, they're eating penguins and lassoing whales this whole time. Then they go another 800 miles, the last 5 guys who could even function. One of the most amazing nautical adventures of all time, 800 miles, get themselves to where they started, send a boat back, and after 2 years, Shackleton rescues every person that he set down there with. Wow. Incredible survival story. Yeah. And think about putting that level of grit and determination, and I will get this done at any cost, not only in your kid's mind, but in your own mind. When you read this with your young man, like, that's how you learn that's how you grow your own sense of resilience, is by seeing others who have done the same. Yeah.
Boy, and reading that story is powerful, but having conversations about it, you were talking earlier about how throughout human history we've learned through stories. We've learned through stories, but we've also learned from those conversations we had after we heard those stories. It's like, John, did you hear about Shackleton? I mean, dude, the penguins and the boat got crushed. And that kind of, having those kind of exciting conversations with our kids are really what drive home those lessons and really inspire kids, I think.
Yeah, and that's exactly why it was written like this. And, I took a unique approach to the writing style. It's written in second person for a lot of these stories. So I write it as you are Ernest Shackleton, and your boat just sank. What are you going to do? And like, you are flying over the Great Wall of China right now, or you are Robert Smalls and you've got to steal this sailboat from the Charleston Harbor and sail off to the Union Army. What are you going to do right now? So that's one way that I really made the biggest effort I could to instill these principles by putting you in the hero's shoes as the reader. And then the other way is the comic book art that's in this book. We got Johnny Dombrowski, who's just an amazing artist, and he made these like gritty but beautiful, kind of like Frank Miller, Sin City style, artistic depictions of all of these. And so just flipping through the book alone, it's like, whoa, look at this! Whoa, look at this! What is this? It's just the most beautiful like layout to the book as well. It's really I just think the art he did is just a treasure.
That's fantastic. And one of the things that we really like to stress to families is that reading comic books, reading graphic novels, it's reading. And especially because there are so many great stories that are found in these new illustrated ways of telling stories. Hey, John, you're a different kind of cat. You know, you're not your typical guy. We were talking before the show, and you're coming out here. You're going to Puerto Rico next week, and you're coming to Boston in the summertime to teach kite sailing and climbing Mount Everest and how did you get to be where you are and who you are?
Man, that's a great question. I've always had a really acute awareness that I only live once, and there's so much beauty in the world, and there's so many wonderful people and characters, and it would be a shame not to see it. And maybe that comes as a result of being up against some kind of darkness at times. I've been around a lot of death, especially in the mountains. I've had to process through some traumas, and it hasn't been easy. And I think that contrast of knowing how awful it can be makes me want to choose a really stellar and fantastic fun life as the alternative. Mm-hmm. Like, I know how fragile life is because I've been up and close with with life departing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We were talking earlier about, you and Penguin Random House came together to, create this book to battle the toxic masculinity. How do you think we got to this point where we have to battle this thing called toxic masculinity? I was raised, now granted it was 100 years ago, but I was raised to be kind, to think of others, to be strong. A lot of those messages that I heard, suck it up, you don't have to cry, get up, walk off that broken leg, you're going to, those weren't necessarily great messages, but the message to be kind and to be caring, that was really out there. To be respectful of women, that was there. But it seems at some point that got distorted in some ways or lost.
I agree with you, and my theory is that up until the industrial age, we had rites of passages, these trials that young men had to go through in order to be considered a man or a warrior in that culture. Examples, a few. In current-day Tanzania and Kenya, you had to hunt and kill a lion in order to be considered a man. And if that lion ate you, well, guess you weren't a lion after all. Like in Vanuatu, you had to jump from a 100-foot tree, be pushed really, with vines tied around your legs. And the closer your head came to the ground, the more of a man you were deemed because you didn't fear death. In the Hamar tribe, they would castrate a bull, many bulls, and then you'd have to get naked and run across the backs of these freshly castrated bulls in that culture in order to be a man. In the Mawe tribe in Brazil, you have to shove your hand into a leaf glove full of bullet ants. Now, that's not just like a fire ant. That's the most painful insect sting on earth. It sends you into 24 hours of vomit-inducing seizures and convulsing pain And you don't have just one ant in there. You've got like a whole heap of ants, and you have to keep your hand in that glove for 5 minutes. Now, all this, by today's standard, is abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, what those trials taught was, despite everything that hurts in the world, because that's what those were, those were real threats that those people faced, so you had to show how to overcome them. With everything that hurts in the world, do you still have the strength to take care of yourself and to protect your tribe? That's what all of them were designed to do. We threw out the trials because in today's, in America, all of those are just inane and abusive,
mm-hmm.
right? They hunt a lion, you're just going to kill a kid. That doesn't serve us at all. So we threw them out, but with it, we threw out this tough love lesson of, can you stand up to the threats that are in the world? We don't have anything that teaches that any longer. And then with that, got thrown away, are you competent to handle yourself? And can you protect your tribe? Can you look after them? Can you see that there's something greater than yourself? That's my theory and thought, mm-hmm. that these rites of passages left, and through, when you grew up, some of that continued, and then kids growing up now, it's just kind of like, well, whatever, is a lot of what, why these values aren't taught anymore, unless there's a really loving and caring and intentional parent or a set of teachers or guides mm-hmm. in their life. That's where this book comes in to fill in that gap. All of these stories are replacement rites of passages. Like, here's you in this intense situation. Do you have what it takes to do those two things? To look after yourself and to care about others enough that you'll protect them.
There's so much about this I love. I'm just imagining, I can almost hear certain people screaming, "Oh, we don't need this. Why can't just kids be loving and caring and just get along?" And I would love that. I love kids to be loving and caring and that we all just get along. But I don't know. That doesn't just seem realistic to me. It doesn't seem like it's just going to happen.
You can complain about what it should be and what the ideal should be, but look at what we've got. Look at what that results in. I also would love it if there's loving and caring and everybody just gets along without the effort of instilling morals. But that just isn't reality, unfortunately. And if you can deny reality all you want, but it doesn't change what reality actually is. And that's that kids need guidance today. And so I should point out that this is for kids who are between 8 and 16 years old. Mm-hmm. That's the age range for the book, because we get into some intense subjects, and we talk about sexual abuse and what that is, and that's a subject that is handled, I believe, well in this book, delicately, but for that age group is like when it should be coming on their radar. So I do want to throw that out for any parent out there. Yeah. You could skip over it, and parents do that. Those two chapters with that talk about general abuse and then talk about the Me Too movement. However, a lot of parents just read the book like with their 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, and just pass over those ones. Mm-hmm. So I do want to throw that out for parents out there.
Yeah. Well, there's a part of me that wants to say, well, of course parents review books that they give to their kids, but the reality is a lot of times they don't. And so I'm happy that you mentioned that, because, yeah, it is. I think that that's a really important subject for every kid to kind of deal with when they're ready for it. And a parent should be aware of when kids are getting those messages and hearing those messages.
What's interesting is that when a parent gets it on their radar that, oh, my kid is kind of growing up or having thoughts that are, new thoughts for them to be having, studies have shown that those thoughts about sexual development or identity have started 3 to 5 years sooner than the parent realizes. Mm-hmm. And so as much as we hate thinking our kids are growing up, that's a part of growing up, and it's a really important part of any human's identity. And so, from a bird's eye perspective view, this book does touch on that, and I do want to be sensitive to families in there and each parent's approach. So there's nothing in here that I think that I wouldn't have a conversation with a 12-year-old young man if they asked about it, and that's obviously why I wrote it. But I know that not everybody thinks the same way as myself.
Yeah. Now, again, just going back to something we touched on early on, can a girl sit down and enjoy this? Can a dad sit down and read this with her daughter and have some really meaningful conversations?
95% of what's in this book applies for all humans. So, yes, of course.
Yeah.
And the 5% that is specific for males is useful for girls to read as well, because that helps girls to understand what guys are going through. It helps with empathy of like, oh gosh, like they have it way different than us, and it's actually really tough for guys too, and guys go through a lot of difficulties that I never had on my radar. And so to put that understanding in a young woman's mind helps her, and it also helps with her to be able to identify the kind of, if she's a heterosexual girl, the kind of things that she doesn't want to be dealing with guys in a romantic sense. So it kind of says, hey, heads up, if you see a guy that's not living up to these standards, you don't want to be around that guy. You don't want to date that guy.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. This is really exciting. Where can folks go to learn more about Warrior Challenge and to learn more about you? Because you got a lot going on, John.
Yeah, thanks for that opportunity or that extension, invite. WarriorChallengeBook.com is the book's website. It's WarriorChallengeBook.com, and that'll give you some videos that I've made about it. You can see the art inside. You can download sample chapter. It's all right there, and that'll also give you a link to download it. I'm also in the process of creating a guide for warrior guides. So if you're a parent or if you're a teacher, throw in your name and email, and when that is ready, then it will be it's a free resource for parents to go through with their kids who want to read this.
Wow. You were mentioning that this is great for 8 to 16-year-olds. I personally know some 35, 36-year-olds who could really benefit from sitting down and reading this with a mentor. But we've had a great time speaking about the Warrior Challenge with our guest, John Beede. Hey, John, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Jed.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Lucinda Robb. She is a granddaughter of Lady Bird and Lyndon Baines Johnson, former President of the United States. She's here to celebrate the Suffragist Playbook, your guide to changing the world. That's the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Hey, once again, we want to invite all of the authors that are listening to the show. We know we have lots of authors listening to the show. Please check out our Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read program. It may just be that thing that you need to help let the world know all about your book. You can find out more by going to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so very wonderful. Of course, want to start by thanking our guest, John Beede. Check out the Warrior Challenge. Also want to thank my team, Alejandro Doherty, Fatima Khan. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. I want to thank Augie the doggy for having my back here in the studio. Most of all, we want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.